Please be seated.
Case number 13-8320, People versus Bashara.
Good morning, Your Honor. Lisa Lindsay on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan.
Good morning, Your Honor. May it please the court. Robert Moran, Assistant Prosecutor.
Good morning. Good morning, Your Honor. Patrick Muscat on behalf of the people.
Good morning. Mark Hindling on behalf of the people.
Good morning to you and your staff. Lillian Dial on behalf of Robert Bashara. Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Michael McCarthy appearing on behalf of Mr. Bashara.
Okay. We're not ready for a stretch break yet, okay? All right, here's the No, you can be seated. We ain't ready to start yet. Just have to sit. Okay. Let me explain what's going on here. The evidence is complete. This is each side's opportunity to address you as to what they believe the evidence shows. You are the final judges of the facts. You determine what the evidence has proven. Because the people bear the burden, they go twice. The court is going to give each side 2 hours to do their closing argument. Followed by rebuttal, the court is going to give 25 minutes for the rebuttal. Because the people bear the burden, they go twice. What the court will do intermittently is to give you stretch breaks as well as breaks in between. We're going to take a lunch break after the people have presented their case. We'll take one for maybe an hour, 15 minutes. I'll determine that. Then we'll come back, but we're going to break it up because it's a lot of information. And you've been here a long time. But remember, this is what they believe the evidence will show. Madam Prosecutor, you may begin. Thank you.
First off, I want to thank each and every one of you. You've been here since the beginning of October. It has been a long time. I don't think we could have anticipated from the very
Madam?
beginning. I don't think we could have anticipated from the very beginning how long the trial would actually last. This is a very important case. There have been some emotional moments during this case, and there's also been a lot of laughter in this case, and that's good because sometimes when things are sad and tragic, you need the laughter to relieve the tension. This is a sad case. And as for me, I'm thanking you on behalf of Kim Worthy, the prosecutor, but more importantly, I'm thanking you on behalf of Jane Bashara, because unlike anybody else, she doesn't have a voice. In this case, the people of the state of Michigan speak for Jane Bashara, and we speak for the dead. And that brings me to the power of words. Words are powerful. Every criminal conspiracy basically begins with whispered words between the co-conspirators. Words bringing forth an action. There is power in the spoken word. If you don't believe me, just go to Genesis. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. He spoke something into existence. The defendant also had the power of words. And he spoke something into existence. The defendant created out of his words a whole another reality for himself. This is a reality different from the reality he had with Jane Bashara. It was a reality different from his financial struggles. It was a reality where he did not feel his wife was overly critical of him. It was a reality he created with his words of a man who was not emasculated, as he explained to Janet Lehman and to Rachel Gillette. His wife made him feel emasculated. With his words, he named himself he named himself Master Bob, and therein created another world. In this world, as he said to Janet Lehman in one of his emails, soon you will feel my strength and passion. That's not the man who has erectile dysfunction. That is a man who feels powerful, loved, adored, and needed. That was different than the reality he was facing. So he created a life as a BDSM master, Master Bob, and he had a life as Rotary President and with Jane. He created one world, he was living in another, and those two worlds ended up colliding. And when those two worlds collided, Jane Bashara ended up dead. Now,
I hate to do this. You got to keep your voice up and try.
okay, she ended up dead. Now, the law recognizes the importance of words. And in life, we recognize the importance of words. In the book of Matthew, says, every man will be held accountable for his words, and his words will either justify him or condemn him. That concept is enshrined in the law, because the law does not really divorce itself from divine truths and common sense. And you're going to be getting it, and the law deals with how to treat a defendant when he lies. What evidentiary value can you attribute to a defendant when he lies? And there are several types of lies. There are lies of commission, where you actively tell a lie, and there's a lie of omission, where you leave something out. And the law gives you a certain guideline on how you can view this evidence. The law says that if you find the defendant made a false statement, if he lied about his involvement in this case, that can be considered by you as circumstantial evidence of guilt. That can be considered by you as circumstantial evidence of guilt. And the judge will give you an instruction about evidence. I can prove something both by direct evidence or by circumstantial evidence. And if you look at the defendant, his conduct, and through his words and lies, if you find that he has lied about certain things in this case, you can use that consciousness of guilt to apply to the elements of this case and find guilt. Now, there are several times that the defendant gave conflicting statements in this case, and his conflicting statements related to his relationship with Joe. The defendant's relationship with Joe is at the heart of the conspiracy. Why is the defendant lying about this relationship? First, he told his daughter, Jessica, that Joe only worked at the Reynolds. Then, he said Joe was at Middlesex once to rake leaves, and he met Jane, but he never told her the iced tea story. And then you get these other statements from the defendant concerning whether Jane met Joe.
Did Joe do odd jobs for you at all at any point?
Yes, he did. In the December area, he came to me and said that he lost his SSI, he needed some work, and I provided him some menial jobs, doing some cleaning. There was an apartment that was trashed that we had to clean out. I let him do that. He did a little painting for me. It was just a small amount of work.
Stop there. Never said that Joe had been to Middlesex. Just didn't mention it. Next statement.
Did Joe ever come to your house, Bob?
One time, to do some work in the backyard.
When did he come to your house to do work in the backyard?
1st of January, first week in January.
Did Joe ever meet Jane?
I don't know. Not at that time, no.
When he was doing work in the backyard, was Jane home?
No, it was during the day. She was at work.
At the heart of this conspiracy is the defendant's relationship with Joe. And the defendant is giving these interviews. And when he's giving these interviews, he's saying that Joe never met Jane. Never met Jane. That false statement, if you're based on his conflicting statements, that collectively with other evidence is circumstantial evidence of guilt. He says something else now.
Did Joe ever meet Jane?
I don't know. Not at that time, no.
When he was doing work in the backyard, was Jane home?
No, it was during the day. She was at work.
But in his most recent interview with Dateline, Bashara says the handyman did have a face-to-face encounter with Jane here on Middlesex.
He did some yard work out back. He had met Jane out in the back. She brought us iced tea one day when we were cleaning up shrubbery and preparing the backyard for the winter.
Well, that's a direct contradiction because in the first story, he says he comes in January. One story he comes in January to do some work out in the back. Now he's talking about shrubbery and giving iced tea. And who's going to bring somebody iced tea outside in the middle of January? Those false statements, the law says, I'm not making this up, this is the law. The law says you can take that as circumstantial evidence of guilt. What else does the defendant say makes false statements about? There's a whole series, and notice how these false statements relate to his relationship with Joe. He never mentioned anything about the phone contact he had with Joseph Gintz on the day that the body was found. The phone records show that there was a phone call that was over a minute between the defendant and Gintz. He never mentions that. On 126, he uses his mother's cell phone to call Gintz, and he had never used his mother's cell phone to contact Gintz ever before. And shortly thereafter, he takes a check to Gintz's job. He gives an envelope to Laura Calloway, and Calloway positively identified the defendant as the person who gave the envelope to her. The check was cashed on the 26th, and the check was for $452. But Mary Morey, who was with the defendant after he got a cell phone, said he had loads of money after that was over. And the timing of the payment to Joseph Gintz is quite suspicious. On the 25th, the defendant finds out his wife is dead. There are people at the house, funeral arrangements to be made, children to be comforted, and then all of a sudden, he decides, I gotta go pay Joe Gintz this $452. There is no way in the world, in the grand scheme of things, that paying Joe Gintz is even on your radar screen after you found out your wife has been killed. But he makes a point of going to pay Joseph Gintz on that day. And furthermore, he makes false statements about that payment. He tells his son, Rob Jr., I paid him before the murder, but he just cashed it after the murder. And then he tells his friend Richard Falcinelli that he had a face-to-face encounter with Joseph Gintz where he handed him the envelope, which we know from Mary Morey is not true. Those false statements, in and of themselves alone and collectively, can be taken by you as consciousness of guilt and circumstantial evidence of the defendant's guilt. Now let's look at the letter that he drafted and that he had drafted by an attorney to turn into the police. The timing of the letter. There has been a lot of talk being made about the police focusing on the defendant right away. Well, let's examine why they focused on the defendant. On the 24th and 25th, he talks to Officer Hayes. He tells Officer Hayes no marital problems whatsoever. In the death notification, he talks to Olson, Locke, and Hannes. He tells them no marital problems, but he talks about a disparity in finances. On the 26th, when he goes on and gives his statement to the police, a tape statement, they talk to him at length. He never once mentioned anything about having an affair. He never talked about anything about the BDSM. That's on the 26th. But he does talk about the financial issues. But on the same day, and you will have a calendar with all the exhibit numbers on it, the same day that the defendant goes in and talks to the police, they immediately get tips because the defendant has been on TV about Rachel Gillette. So now we know on the 26th that he's lied about having an affair and there are marital financial issues. On the 27th, he goes to the police again and gives a statement. Now the police, when they're talking to him on the 27th, they know already about Rachel Gillette. He never mentions Rachel Gillette. And at that point, Olson privately and Rose Point Park publicly decided he was a person of interest. Reason and common sense, you would, anybody with reason and common sense based on those facts would give the defendant a closer look. Now, the defendant, and up until this point, the defendant has not mentioned Joseph Gibbs' name at all. None whatsoever. I have no clue what happened. Random carjacking. But once focus is shifted to him, and he knows the focus is shifted to him, he has a letter drafted. The timing of the letter is after he's a suspect, and let's look at the things he doesn't say in the letter. He talks about some phone contact, but he doesn't mention other phone contact. He doesn't mention the phone contact on the 25th. He doesn't mention the 26th, using Nancy's phone. He doesn't mention payment to Gentz. And he doesn't talk about meeting Gentz through Mr. Chavato. Those are all things he kept out and away from the police. Those omissions can be taken by you as consciousness guilt. So now, not only do you have outright lies, you have lies of omission. Those things can be taken as circumstantial evidence of guilt. Now, the defendant made several false statements about where he was or the period of what he did that day. Now, let's look at his first story to the police. He said he was at the Mack property the whole time. In his very first dispatch call, he said he was at the Mack property the whole time. He tells Breen, Debbie Breen, and Miss Flaska he was there the whole time. When he got the death notification, he told Olson and Locke he was there the whole time. He told Jessica, Robert, and Eileen Stradlack that he was there the whole time, and in his official statement, he said he was at the Mack property the whole time. But that story changes. The second story is he had to go back to Middlesex to get keys. And he told that to Jessica, Robert, his cousin Mike Scaff, and to Eileen Stradlack. But there's even a third story that comes from the defendant, and that's the story he told to his friend, Mr. Falcinelli. And it's very interesting that Mr. Falcinelli, before he even gave his first statement to the police, indicated that he contacted the defendant and David Grimm, his attorney, to get instruction for Bob's benefit. And after getting instruction for Bob's benefit, he tells us in the first statement that the defendant said he was traveling between multiple properties that day. And what's even more important about this change in the story is the defendant omitted something very important from that story. He never mentioned to the police, his friends and family, he never mentioned to Mr. Falcinelli anything about going to pick up the closing packet for the house on Kensington. Both Ms. Young and Ms. Michelli indicated that at about 3:30 on the 24th, the defendant came to the office and picked up the closing packet. He doesn't tell anybody that. That is something he is hiding from the police. You can take that as circumstantial evidence of that. And now let's look at something that the defendant did in terms of misdirecting the police. The defendant claims that he is trying to help the police find out who did something to his wife. He said, I'm cooperative, I want to give them information. And so he talks about, well, maybe his wife went out for some marijuana. Let's hear that.
A hormone pill. Okay. And she was having trouble sleeping was a big challenge for her. And you were talking about digging up dirt, and I'm not going to narc on my poor wife, but she did smoke marijuana. Okay. Okay.
No, but that's good because you know what?
It's going to come out on the tox screen anyways. If you're doing a blood thing on her, I'm sure you've done that. So she, took a couple puffs before she went to bed, helped her sleep. I saw no trouble in it. I mean, I used to smoke when I was in high school. I haven't touched it in a while, but I didn't see any trouble in it. Sure. I didn't really know where she was getting it from, but I wasn't going to question it, and I let her do her thing.
Okay. So that's another angle, which is an important angle because
maybe.
Two things in that clip. He throws out to the police that maybe she got killed when she was out getting drugs. Well, actually, three things. He doesn't know her source, and he says he hasn't touched anything like that in a while. So the first thing is he's misdirecting the police, making himself look better by saying, I don't do that. And then also saying he doesn't know the source, which is a direct lie because you heard the testimony of Julie Rowe, who indicated that he, the defendant, supplied the marijuana. And then you have the testimony from Mr. Carmody, who was a good friend of his. Mr. Carmody indicated that the defendant said he knew Jane did not go out for marijuana because there was an ample supply of marijuana at the house. That is a direct lie to direct the police away from the defendant. That, by you, can be taken as circumstantial evidence of guilt to be applied to the elements of the case. The defendant talks about the Backpage murders as a way of misdirection.
Her husband is now asking for the public's help.
Please come forward. The police need your help. In addition to those 4 women that have been put in the trunks, terrible things. Anyone that knows anything, please come forward.
Also,
and then there's the whole thing about the hinky meter. The defendant, there was a blog website that the defendant became aware of, and the police became aware of, called the hinky meter. And the testimony shows that on the hinky meter, people were putting out evidence as it related to the defendant and Rachel Gillette. The defendant contacted Therese Giffen, who was one of his acquaintances through the BDSM lifestyle, and he specifically asked her, and the thing that's interesting about Therese Giffen is Therese Giffen is an ex-police officer. He's having conversations with an ex-police officer. She knows, as an ex-police officer, when police are given leads, they have to follow. And she said one of the reasons why they discussed putting out the story about Jane having a boyfriend and the boyfriend doing it because it would lead the police in a direction away from the defendant. That is a false statement that shows consciousness of guilt, and you can take it as circumstantial evidence of guilt. And the other thing is, you just don't have to take Therese Giffen's word when she says she put false stuff out. Eileen Stradilat is a friend of the defendant, and the defendant told her that he had 4 people post things on the hinky meter that were deleted. So the defendant, again, is putting out falsehoods in this case. There are certain things that the defendant did that you just don't do as an innocent man. He changed his cell phone usage. Before Jane's body is even found, and before anybody even knew she was murdered, he starts using Nancy Bashara's phone. He used Nancy Bashara's phone to call Rachel that night. He used Nancy Bashara's phone to text Janet Lehman, the lady in Oregon, and say, family emergency, cease communication. The defendant began to hide his motive before there was even a crime to be investigated. When he talked to Police Officer Hayes, he said no extramarital affairs. There's no reason to lie at that point. No reason whatsoever for him to lie to the first person on the scene about his wife's death. At the death notification, he doesn't tell about the extramarital affairs. And even more importantly, on 125, the phone records show he had phone contact with Courtney Johns. And Courtney Johns, who was a tenant at Rachel's house on Cadgy, the house the defendant had sold to Rachel after taking the loan from his mom, he told Courtney Johns, tell anybody, tell the police, if they come asking, Rachel and I are just friends. Those false statements, those attempts to have other people give false statements, go to the consciousness of guilt. Now, this is something really important here. The defendant talks to the police. He talks to Detective Olson. And the Detective Olson tells him specifically, we may need to get into your computers.
I don't have a Facebook account, nothing.
Okay. Do you and the wife have separate computers, or you guys have a joint computer?
We have a joint computer that, by the way, has died on us. I have to have it worked on it. But we have a joint computer that I have the rentals, and we have some like Christmas letters and things like that on. And then she has her laptop that she uses mostly for that.
Okay. At some point, that might be something I might need to look at.
Okay.
Maybe she was corresponding with emails to somebody. I'm working on another case involving just that. So it's, mention anything.
Yeah.
But, so computers can be helpful or they can't be. I mean, I can't say that one way or the other without maybe taking a look at it.
Yeah, she has a account.
On the 26th, before any tips come in about Rachel, the police tell the defendant, we might need to get into those computers. Those computers may have evidence. And what does the defendant do? The defendant had a long-standing account on alt.com that he and Rachel shared a blog on. And you can see the dates. The first screenshot is from 2010. So he's maintained this account on alt.com since 2010. And on these blogs, and the most recent blog on that was January 20th, 2012, approximately 4 days before the murder, where Rachel is blogging about the defendant going to Oregon to meet Slave J. That's on the computer. They tell the defendant, we want to look at your computer. And they're not even telling the defendant, we want to look at the computer because we're focusing on you. They said, we want to look at the computer because we might want to find something about your wife. And what happens on the 27th? Did you go into the date? On the 27th, after the police have specifically told the defendant that the computers might be helpful in solving your wife's murder, he deletes his account from alt.com. That account has all the evidence of his motive. Why did he do that? That can be taken by you as circumstantial evidence of guilt. Now let's go to the motive. Rachel Gillette. There is no dispute that he was obsessed with Rachel Gillette. He would say anything and do anything to be with Rachel Gillette. Several people have indicated as such. He tells her, my relationship with her is over, no sex, no feelings. Hell, she's not happy and wants to part. So we're working on a plan. And that continued consistently throughout the years. I want you, period. In 2010, he talks about he's ready to make a life-changing event for her. Life-changing event for her. It continues. And he specifically talks about the financial impact him not being with Jane is going to have on his life. As to the income I will be missing, oh well, I'd rather live in a one-room shack or whatever you said and be happy than be rich and not be happy. He specifically indicates in 2011 in an email to Rachel, not having her in my house is a huge rock lifted off us. A rock I am lifting now. And the date on that email was in July. They started house hunting in earnest in August and September.
There's been talk and there's been reports. Was there talk of a divorce? Was there talk of, were you separated?
No, not at all. No.
Talk to me a little bit, I know Dave talked to you a bit about the reports about an affair, extramarital affair. Were you having an affair?
No, I was not. I loved my wife. I loved my children. And I would do nothing to hurt them. And I just, she meant everything to me.
So the reports and the other woman by the name of Rachel, you would characterize that as?
She was a good friend. That's it.
While we're talking about this, we'll talk about...
Can I have that up just one more time? You notice he said in his email that the need to hide would be over. So in 2011, in July, they are still hiding the relationship. Those are the defendant's words. Remember, there are power in words. He sat down at a computer screen. He thought about what to say. He chose the words. He indicated to Rachel that our time for hiding is coming to an end. He was obsessed with Rachel as evidenced by the PPO. I am very concerned about my safety in and around my home due to the harassment of Bob Bashara. I have told him repeatedly that I want no future relationship with him, and this is after the murder. He's still pursuing her after the murder. He is deliberate enough to drive different vehicles and park at my house. This shows you the defendant's pattern and conduct when he's doing something he's not supposed to do. He is using different cars to avoid being seen. Now, there are several things that the defendant told the men in his BDSM world about Rachel. He told Patrick Webb that he was going to divorce his wife. He loved Rachel. He also told that to Robert Goddard, the person in the corner there. He told Lawrence Wolf not only was he going to divorce his wife, he was going to take Rachel and Janet Lehman into a new house that he was buying on Kensington. And to that, Mr. Wolf said, "Bob, are you nuts?" So he's telling people what his plans are. And he tells Mr. Falsinelli during the week that his wife is being buried to contact Rachel and tell Rachel, maintain the status quo, I still love you. Because basically, this is my wife's funeral and everything. That's an annoyance, because once this is over, we're going to be together. That is circumstantial evidence of guilt through his motive. And there are constant, and even after Jane is dead, there are constant contacts with the defendant trying to get a hold of Rachel. He uses Giffen. He uses Mr. Fick's phone, his maintenance man, to call Rachel at Wayne State University. He uses Falsinelli repeatedly. And even the social worker at the jail gave evidence through way of stipulation of the defendant's stipulation. She knew about the PPO, and despite the PPO being in effect, the defendant asked her to contact Rachel from the jail. the defendant, even a couple of months after the murder. Like I said, I don't know why I cannot get her out of my head. Like you said, she's not a beauty queen, but to me, something special. I can't get her out of my head. Giffen tells me at another point, you're obsessed. Give it a rest. He says, I am, so relax. So the defendant not only had an obsession with Rachel, he gave Rachel lots of money. Money, by the way, he did not have to give. You're going to see an exhibit when you go into the exhibit room, Exhibit 522, that outlines the defendant's constant financial problems since 2009. Can I say? These are the payments the defendant gave to Rachel in 2011 alone. Look at that. From the amount he got from United Labs, look how much money he gave Rachel that year. Money he did not have to give because the testimony will show he was always behind in all his payments. He could not afford to have both Rachel and a wife.
Let's stop right here. Stretch break. Let's stand up. Stretch break. Okay.
Go ahead.
Get your glasses. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute recess.
Okay.
You need to get your glasses. And we'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.